Hello and welcome. If you're new to my channel, my name is Christina, and in this week's video, I'm really excited to share 5 fun DIY projects with you. It's all about recreate, restyle, and recycle. So let's head over to project 1. I recently found this desk. It's absolutely beautiful, but there's some knocks and definitely some chips in the veneer. But I would like to salvage some of the wood look. So I want to show you a few tips and tricks of things that I did to retransform what this desk could look like. So I think what I'm going to do first is sand off those drawer fronts using a very fine sandpaper at 220 grit. I want to see how light I can get these drawer fronts, even knowing they're veneer, even knowing we have a few chips, and see what color tone we're going to get to. Normally with chipped veneer, I would recommend to use some wood filler, but because we want to actually salvage the wood grain, I'm going to have to try something else in hopes that it works. So I toyed with the idea of just painting the top of the desk, but I thought since we got this beautiful wood tone color, I was kind of hoping maybe I could tie into the whole transformation a smooth finish on the top. And again, I'm still dealing with some chipped veneer on the top of the desk. I thought, well, let's give it a try. Let's go ahead and sand this off and see if we can get that grain the same color, and hopefully I can do what I'm planning to do, and I'm really hoping it works, to see if we can salvage a large portion of the wood grain of the desk. So with sanding disc, you want to start with a veneer. I recommend the 220 to start and then go higher, and that's going to help give a nice smooth finish once everything is done. It actually goes really quickly. Also going with up to a 350-400 sand grit paper, that's going to help take out any of the ring lines that can happen with your orbital sander. If your sand grit is too hard, you could actually risk chipping the veneer even further and not being able to rescue. So I'm going to work with what I've got and see what we can do. So I think what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to paint the actual frame with the graphite chalk paint by Annie Sloan. I would like to demonstrate something a little bit different when it comes to the regular chalk painting and then applying a wax after. What I would like to do is actually use a white wax, but what I'm going to do is a lacquer finish first, then I want to do a wax. I'm going to explain a little bit more as we get into the project. First thing I'm going to do is just get on a very thin coat so I can go around to all my edges and corners. But for the tabletop, what I thought, in hopes that it might work, is I'm actually just going to lightly feather, almost like a bleed look of the chalk paint all around the edge of the desk, all the sides including the back. This way I could actually maybe cover it up with the chalk paint, and when I do what I plan on doing next, I'm really hoping it masks those chipped veneered pieces at the edges and corners, including the drawers. What I want to do is create a ton of texture with my chalk paint, and which is really easy to do with chalk paint because it's a thick base paint. So I applied 2 coats, and I'm going to wait for everything to dry before I get into the white wax. And I normally would just do it right over the chalk paint, but like I explained, I want to try something a little bit different this time. What I'm going to do first is make a whitewash, and the whitewash is just going to be for the raw wood. I would like to brighten the veneer just a tiny little bit more, and I'll show you the difference of why. Chalk paint wash is just 50% paint, 50% water. And it's because chalk paint is the water-based paint, it actually works beautifully when you want to just create a nice little hue of a color, whether you're using a white or a dark charcoal or black. But in this case, I want to use the white in hopes that I can bring out the wood color in a little bit more of a bleached wood look. I try to work with the grain of the wood, so going in the same direction, both when I apply the paint wash and when I wipe it back. And you want to use a lint-free cloth because if there is lint, it will grab onto the paint wash and it gets a little tricky to get it off. Even though we have a lot lighter and we've gotten rid of a lot of the varnish that was originally on the veneer, you can see that the paint wash actually still does a really beautiful brightening effect to the wood. Paint wash will dry very quickly, so give it about 15 minutes. And if you want, you're more than welcome in any situation that you're wanting to try this. If you'd like it a little bit lighter, go ahead, do another wash on top. It all really depends on how light you want to go and also the wood that you're doing a paint wash on. I'm pretty happy just with the one, so I'm just going to do the one wash on the fronts of the drawers. I went ahead and I put my paint wash on the top of the desk and I put 2 coats as I noticed that the varnish wasn't completely off from the sanding, and that's because there was a little bit more damage to the top of this dresser than there was the drawer fronts. So I'm just trying to improvise with the little imperfections to really help and save to upcycle this. So what I want to try is a lacquer in the matte. So that's how I'm going to seal the chalk paint on the graphite base. Then I want to apply my white wax. So I actually applied 2 full coats. It goes on a little bit of a milky color sometimes. Not to worry, it will dry 100% clear and it will dry in a matte. But I also went in a lot of different directions with the lacquer. This will allow me to create more texture when I go to apply my white wax. In the past, I have applied white wax directly to the chalk paint with no lacquer. This will also seal your chalk paint. The reason I wanted to do it in this step is because I didn't want to overly smoke the white over the graphite. I just wanted the white wax to sit in the low points of all the texture I made. This will give it more of a pewter look versus if I put the wax directly on the chalk paint. I found that in the past that I've done it, it's a beautiful look, but I really wanted the graphite to really still be able to stand out, so this allowed it to do so, as well as make the pop in all of that texture, which is what I wanted to create. Like all waxes for furniture pieces, just apply it like a moisturizer. Just put some on, rub it around really good, use a clean cloth to wipe it back and give it a little bit of a buff. Always remember, lacquer first, then the wax. My plan worked and it hid all the little cracked veneer pieces on the corners. I found this rocking chair on the Facebook Marketplace and I fell in love. It wasn't quite the style or the fabric I was looking for, but I figured, you know what, with a little DIY, I might be able to do something. So I'm actually going to be using this fiddler's cloth. I got it at Michael's Crafts. You probably can get it at Hobby Lobby in the US. Or you can substitute it for, say, a burlap or even a linen. But this is what I already had, so that's what I wanted to use. But I am going to paint the base in the chalk paint French linen just to start. Always start with a very small amount of paint. There's a lot of small detail. There's a lot of very thin curves to this. So if you have too much paint, it will end up just getting really clumpy. So I always start with a little bit and just work my way in small sections. Always really helpful to clean your pieces with TSP. This will help remove old varnishes, cleaning products, and even oils off our hands off of old furniture pieces. I would really like to go with a two-toned effect for this piece. So I'm going to apply one coat of French linen, let it dry. Sometimes with the darker finish colors like this, it may be recommended, because you're going with a lighter color, you may need two coats, but with chalk paint it's usually thick enough that it's not to worry, that one coat should do the trick. I also find these small hand palm chip brushes really helpful, because you've got a lot of areas that if you have a long handle, it will end up knocking, especially when you're trying to go around these curved areas where the arms are. Once I get the full base coat on, I'm going to go and let it dry. With the next technique that I want to show you, it's usually best just to let it dry overnight. And next I want to plan out how I'm going to add a new upholstery and some new trim to the seat cover. So the next plan I'm going to do is chalk paint wash again. I'm going to use the old white chalk paint mixed with water 50-50, and then I want to use what is called the ragging technique. So I take a moist shop towel. Reason I want it to be moist is because I don't want to actually wipe back the paint wash. What I want it to do is actually create a texture. We have a little bit of the texture from the chalk paint, it's being so thick, and just from random brush strokes, but adding the ragging technique on top of your already texture just creates a beautiful finish. So all I do is I literally dab it, and the more I can move my moist shop towel around, the more texture it's going to leave behind just with the rag print. Just really important that your base coat is 100% dry, because if there is some moist spots in the areas of your base coat, when you apply the chalk paint wash, everything's just going to wipe back. So it's really important to make sure that that's dry. Any chalk paint washes, always really helpful. Just go in small sections and go with what you're comfortable. There's no rush. The little thing flickering on the wall is just a reflection from the sun and the tree outside. It looks like a little bird. This is what it looks like as it starts to dry, and it leaves such a beautiful textured finish and a beautiful two-toned look. Because I'm going to be using a light wash on top of already a light color, it's probably best just to only have to do one color wash, but if you want it to be even lighter, feel free, once the paint wash is completely dry, to go ahead and do another one on top. This will only add to the texture. The fiddler's cloth is actually a little bit on the stiffer side. It's not overly soft, but it's thick, so it will cover the pattern that's underneath really well. And I'm just going to go around and cut it to the shape of the chair seat. I am going to go around and apply a new trim all the way around as well, pretty much mirrored to the same color, maybe slightly lighter. Because there's a lot of dark tones on the original fabric that's there, it is best to use something relatively thick if you're going to reupholster the top surface. I opt to keep the original is because it was in mint condition. There was nothing wrong with it. I just cleaned it, and it's actually going to add to the softness and the cushion from when you sit down. So if I ripped it all up, then I'd have to put all new padding inside. So as I say, for this particular chair, it was just as well to leave what was there. I'm just going to apply a little bit of hot glue so that way I can run my new material all the way around smoothly, all around the surface of the seat. I made tiny little, almost little folds, but it's more of a little crease at the corners of the chair, and I just tacked it in place using the furniture tacks as I went around and used the hot glue. Hot glue is actually very safe for fabrics. It's just recommended to make sure that your hot glue gun is on a lower setting. A lot of fabric places also carry what is called a liquid stitch. So if you don't have a hot glue gun, you can always get liquid stitch and it will do the same job. The fabric trim that I'm using actually has a little bit of elastine to it, so it makes it perfect for being able to go around the curvature of the chair as well as the corner. So if I need to make a little fold or a little turn into it, it works out perfectly. Just go around in small sections. Don't feel like you have to do a long stretch with your hot glue. I worked in small sections when I wanted to put the trim on, so that way it had a nice tight fit. It also helped with the folding and the symmetry of the chair by just going around in small sections. Once I had the trim on and completed, then I took out the little furniture tacks that helped with the creases and folds at the corner. I'm going to seal the entire frame with the matte lacquer, just so that way it protects the chalk paint. And what a difference from before to after. So really dear friends of mine actually had this in their basement and they were thinking about getting rid of it. And I thought, no, we could upcycle this. I actually had these old door plates and door knobs, and I kind of had this envision that it would be kind of cool to make the door in the front of these shelves open kind of like French doors, and then add these old antique doorknobs. So the doors were placed, and then it was actually one whole door and then cut in half. Then we just went ahead and added some brackets so that way they would place in the front of the shelving unit. So it was a perfect upcycle, and it's going to be perfect for storage. But it's a little bit on the pine side, so I thought, you know what, why not add a little bit of some white chalk paint, even in a wash, see what I can do. And I would love to patina these old upcycled doorknobs and back plates as well. So 50-50 chalk paint to water. What's really important about using a chalk paint wash is if you're going to be working on a couple of projects like I have, or if you're working on a larger project, is to make sure to keep stirring your chalk paint wash. Chalk paint generally will like to sit, or any paint for that matter, will want to sit at the bottom and the water will go to the top. So this way you can keep that consistency, always 50-50 if you just add a stir as you're working in your project. So I actually have a ton of other things that I've been filming, and I'm so looking forward to sharing a lot of these projects, including this room that I'm working in. I've already started and I'm almost finished the entire makeover, so I'm definitely going to be sharing that entire process, what I did, why I did it, and how easy it is to create new symmetries and add dimensions to your box rooms that just feel like four walls and a window. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you soon. For this piece, the only reason I decided to go ahead just with a plain whitewash and not really add any color or other than kind of go with the wooded look is when you see the whole room kind of put together, it will make sense. I want it to be cohesive with the other pieces that are currently in this room, and then I want to go around and add these really fun pops of color. So these vintage door handles and back plates are actually kind of a faux. Even knowing to open and close the doors, it is with the doorknob, but they don't actually work in the same fashion that they're designed to. That's why I opt to actually put them on while I'm doing my paint wash. So I applied them first, is so that way I could add a little bit of a wash patina on top of the hardware itself. It's quite old. It's a little bit on the not rusted side, but it has a rusted look, and I wanted to kind of soften it a little bit with the paint wash. On raw wood, paint wash will absorb very, very quickly, and you actually don't need to wipe back very much. So I opt to actually have the wet cloth as well as a dry cloth, because some areas I actually was a little bit too moist and some areas I needed the moisture. And this helped with the continuity up and down, so that way it wasn't too white or too light. This also allowed me to be a little bit more even with the chalk paint wash, so that way it wasn't too white in certain areas and not light enough in other areas. But as you can see in a couple of the projects of this video, it really doesn't matter what type of wood you're working on. But if you want to, on raw wood of any kind, go ahead and give it a lighter, more birched look. Doing the chalk paint wash is a beautiful way of not only upcycling, but changing out the style and really brightening up your furniture pieces. What I've always really enjoyed about chalk paint is no matter what surfaces I'm painting and types of materials, it always works. I wanted to show you how you can make a 4-row, rather large, basket weave chunky blanket, and I love this beautiful plush light pink. So first thing you'll want to do is make a slip knot. It's really easy, just going to tie a little knot. Then you're going to want to make your stitch loops approximately about 3 inches, especially with this super bulky yarn. And because you're going to be working with your fingers, I try to just kind of open it up with my thumb and my index finger and try to go with nice even stitches. So I'm going to go and start making 26 stitches. So you're going to grab your working yarn and pull a little loop, and you're going to make 26 loops. So this is actually going to start you off with 26 stitches. So technically we're making a chain. And the chain is so that way we can create our physical stitches. So it's a stitch, but a chain version of it first. Now that we've made 26, not to confuse you, but the first stitch and the last stitch are actually going to be part of your border. So we'll get back into that a little bit later on. But right now, that top bump that you see me pointing at, you're going to grab that working yarn and you're going to pull your first chain of stitches. So you're just going to grab that one bump side by side and just pull the working yarn up until your entire row of 26 is done. These chunky yarns always stitch up really quickly, so this blanket only took me about 2.5 hours to create, all in one sitting, so it goes very, very quickly. And the full length of it was approximately 5 feet by 4.5 feet, so it's a pretty big blanket. I used 6 balls of the chunky chenille yarn, which also too is 100% washable. So if you can, just try to make sure that your stitches are even at approximately about 3 inches per loop. And once you start getting the size association, it will start to go faster and faster. Always remember too that the very last stitch is almost, you're going into the slip knot that you started. So that's going to be the 26th stitch. But again, just remember the last stitch of both sides is actually going to be part of your border. So that stitch is always going to be the same. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in just a few moments. Because of the pattern I'm going to show you, you want your border to be even and look the same all the way around your blanket. So just kind of think to yourself, those 2 last stitches at each end, those are border stitches. So you need to remember that now before I confuse you. So just think of it that way. So what we're going to be doing is rows of 4, and we're actually going to be doing stitches of 4. That's what makes this basket weave very, very thick, and it's going to look a little bit more grand. So I'm going to start with these back stitches. So grabbing that working yarn from the back of the stitch, I'm going to go and I'm going to do 4. Remember, the end one is only for the border. Now I'm going to go into my next 4 stitches. So as you can see, we did the stitches originally from the back. Now we're going to go to the front. It's actually called a purl, but for the sake of learning, I find it much easier just to say a back stitch, now a front stitch. So you're pulling the working yarn through the stitch, through the front of the stitch. When we do the back stitch, the working yarn is behind the stitch. So think of the whole pattern as sections of 4. So 4 back stitches, 4 front stitches, and you're going to do that. That's why you made 26. You actually did 24 stitches, but you made 2 stitches for your border. Then you're going to do 4 rows of the exact same pattern. 4 back stitches, 4 front stitches. Then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reversing, doing the exact same thing. 4 back, 4 front stitches, 4 rows, but you're going to do the opposite, and I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. So those 2 end stitches, all you need to remember is they are always a back stitch. Take the working yarn from the back and pull your loop and make your stitch from the back. This way, your entire border all the way around your blanket will almost look like a braid, and it will make it a little bit more cohesive. So again, just remember those 2 end stitches, back stitch only. And when you're done, I will also show you how to close the blanket and create the same border effect again. If you're new to hand knitting or using this chunky yarn and you're wanting to create this kind of pattern, I do recommend, and I say this because I've made the mistake, is as you're going along, it's just really good to check each row, especially as a newbie, because I've made the mistake where I ended up doing the same stitching and I kind of misguided my pattern. So it's just good to check that you're following that pattern of 4 back stitches, 4 front stitches each time, because if you don't check and you come back and you've already gone up a few rows, the only way you're going to be able to correct that is by unraveling everything. So just check each row. It just makes it a little bit easier that you're following the pattern. I definitely have unraveled a few blankets because of that mistake. But again, remember 4 back stitches, so your working yarn comes from the back of the stitch, 4 in the front. And then once we've created the 4 rows, you can even see how many you've counted. So if you're unsure of what row you're on, you can easily count it just by looking at the stitch. But now that I have created my 4 rows, I want to swap it now. So as I get into my next row, what I'm going to be doing is where you see the back stitch, I'm going to do a front stitch and vice versa. I have demonstrated in previous tutorials, you can do the basket weave stitch using 3 front stitch, 3 back stitch, and you can even do 2 front stitch, 2 back stitch. So it's just a tighter weave, whereas this is a much grander, bigger weave look when you use rows of 4. So now I've started my first row of my reverse. Just to quickly show you how easy it is when you're ready to start a new ball of yarn, just tie it into a knot. You want to pull all 4 ends, not too hard, but just so it can all grab and make a nice tight knot. Then the 2 little tails, just cut those off and carry on, and you won't even notice it as you carry on with your hand knitting. Like I mentioned, this blanket took me 6 balls or skeins of yarn. Now I want to show you how we're going to close it. So always make sure that you leave probably about a quarter of a ball of the yarn, so that way you have enough to close your blanket with. So what you're going to do is always remember from the back. So think of it as a back stitch. You're going to take 2 stitches, put them together, put the working yarn through. You'll have 1 stitch left. Take another 2 stitches, put them together like a sandwich, grab the working yarn from the back, stitch. You're almost stitching from the side. Again, this is to create the rest of the border, and we want it to have that continuity, so it almost looks like a braided border all the way around your blanket. With knitting, you have to close your stitches off. With crocheting, you don't. It's a little bit different. But like I said, just sandwich 2 stitches, grab the working yarn, pull it through, you have 1 stitch left. And again, this is just the easy way to cast off. As soon as you have that last stitch, just cut any remainder yarn, and you're just going to tie it through the last stitch, make a nice knot, and you can cut the tail, but I generally will just weave it into the blanket. So good friends of mine have recently moved to the island, and their place is looking fabulous. But they also have some residual furniture from their old home that they sold, and they're trying to make everything kind of cohesive in their new space. So they have this cabinet. It's great. It's probably an old IKEA piece. Now, because they wanted a particular blue, they were kind of going with a little bit of a primitive look. So I thought, I'll see what I can do to help you out. So what I decided to do first was actually just throw this stain on. I'm not even putting it on properly. I'm actually just putting it on to cover the yellow tone that's already there. I wanted the walnut tone, so I'm just using the gel stain as pretty much just as an overcoat. It's not there. It's not, you're not even going to hardly see it by the time I get done with the project itself. But there is a reason that I wanted it to have this color tone of wood versus the yellow that it was. So just wanted that concentrated darker wood tone underneath before I get into the paints. Now for the painting style that I'm going to be doing for this piece, I will show, and it will make sense in just a few moments, why I decided to put the gel stain on first. So this is the blue. There's actually going to be 2 blues. I'm using the Annie Salone chalk paint in the Giverny as well as the Provence. So one is going to be kind of a highlight, the other one's going to be a little bit of a low light. And the objective of what I want to do is try to really create this old primitive look, and I really want the chalk paint to be really soft. So I'm not necessarily dry brushing, but I'm almost doing kind of like a rubbing of the paint. So what's going to end up happening is there is going to be a little bit of wood exposure with the look that I'm going for, and this is why I wanted to have the walnut underneath, the darker tone versus the kind of that lighter yellowy wood. Certain types of woods and wood varnishes underneath my chalk paint when I paint like this. In my personal experience, what has happened is I have left the lighter wood tones to try to get this effect. What's happened is it's actually kind of altered the chalk paint color. Kind of like the theory of yellow and blue makes green. I really wanted to have a strong blue tone because I knew that's what this couple wanted with this piece. So I found it really helpful to put that walnut stain down. But like I said, you're hardly going to see it, but I did find that it does have a slight hindering factor to my outcome. So it was worth just throwing it down. It wasn't about how it looked, it was just under there for the undertone. What I want to do here is, because there's no particular pattern I'm trying to create, what I am trying to do is evenly distribute the lighter blue in the Provence and the darker blue in that Giverny color. And like I said, it's not really a dry brushing, but it is. So I'll take a very small amount of paint and I will keep rubbing it into one direction. And when it's either too light or too dark, I take the opposite color and I start to overlap it. And that's kind of how it's going to blend in together. Now I'm using a little bit of this Arles, which actually is a little bit of a mustard tone. Now I can control this because my paint is dry now on the piece. Whereas if it's underneath my paint and I'm trying to work with it, I may not be able to control it. The reason I wanted the little bit of Arles was actually to help highlight the blue as a complement color, number one, and number two, kind of give it a little bit of a patina, if not a bit of a rust tone to it around the edges and the corners. So I don't actually use very much, a very, very tiny amount, and just into the little recessed door frames. For anyone wanting to try this method, using the gel stain first, I did wait overnight to let that dry because it's thick and I wanted it good and adhered to the piece. So it does take a little bit longer than chalk paint, so it's just best to let it dry overnight. So I'm just going around, again, there's no particular pattern. I'm just creating highlights and lowlights. So I'm creating almost a layer on top of a layer, doing the exact same thing. So wherever you want it to be a little bit lighter and a little bit darker, you're just going to keep adding them on. And by pushing the paint in very small amounts, kind of makes the paint be a little bit more cohesive. I didn't want it to be runny. I didn't want it to be drippy. I didn't want to have sand marks on it. I wanted the paint to just have a naturally worn look to it. So really helpful, just work in small sections, pick the color tones that you want to work with. And I just really wanted to demonstrate how little paint. It's not completely dry, it's still a little bit there, but less is best with this method. And mostly try and stick to the same directions. I didn't really want to do random brush strokes. It's more of just almost just a wiping of the paint. I'm just constantly wiping it in. I started with a base layer, let that completely dry, went back and did the same thing. And sometimes I even changed my mind a little bit. I would make the door handle areas a lot more lighter, edges and corners a lot more lighter. Went around with a little tiny bit more of that Arles into the recessed areas. And again, just creating a little tiny bit of patina and wear on that. Some new hardware. So these are cast iron. These will be in the description box below as well. These are probably my favorite hardware pieces to change with furniture. So to seal my entire project, I'm only going to be using white wax, but I'm going to go around in small sections. So I usually use the lid just to kind of absorb the wax into my brushes, and I'm actually just using an old chip brush. This way I can kind of go around and just lightly place the white wax on there. And some areas I might even get a little bit thicker with it, and some areas I'll get a little bit thinner. Generally, any type of furniture wax will take approximately 1 to 2 weeks to be completely cured to your piece. But if you prefer, you can just use clear wax, or if you wanted to, you can also use a dark wax or a black wax if you really wanted to go with a very kind of a darkened, more decrepit, aged effect. But I like the white wax. I like the softer finish it leaves. It leaves that whitish kind of aged patina look as well. Anytime I do something that's going to have a vintage feeling to it or a primitive feel to it, I absolutely love putting fly specks on it. So I use a toothbrush, I dip it into some paint, I dip it into a little bit of water, I'll use a shop towel or a paper towel just to kind of get all the paint inside to the bristles. This way, when I go around and flick it, it's actually just going to create these random little fly specks across the furniture. And what it does is it actually will create highlights and lowlights. So if you wanted to use a white chalk paint or a black chalk paint, it actually creates a new texture, and I personally love the look. But again, this is an option. You of course do not have to do a step like this. I find that the fly specks kind of tell a story of age and give a piece a little bit more of a historical look to it. Again, it's just a total option, but it is a lot of fun to do. Thank you so much for watching this week's video, and please, if you have any questions or comments, leave me a comment in the comment box below. All the supplies that I've used for this video will be in the description box below. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and notification bell. That's going to tell you when I upload my next video. And until then, take care. I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. No, don't do that. You're wrecking the decor. It's not about Sphinx cats. No. Yeah, go. Do you want to say it? You can say it. Welcome. Welcome to the Raphael show. With you. It's all about recreate, restyle, and Raphael kisses. You're not excited, are you? No, you just want your cookie. That's all you want is a cookie. Well, I'm excited to share this. Okay, can you wait? Can you wait? And then we'll go. Can you just wait 1 second? And then we'll get a cookie. I promise. I promise a cookie.